Hi guys, welcome to this presentation where we will be looking at how to develop a proposition. And we'll also be, of course, focusing on making sure that that proposition works for your target audience. So firstly, to introduce myself, my name is Claire Donner. I work for an agency called Moangen. We are digital mobilization experts. So we work exclusively with charities and not-for-profits. And we work to do a range of different things, from strategy work to design work, but design focused on action. So getting people to give money, join events, support campaigns, etc. But also technology. We have a technology platform called Impact Stack, and this is for campaigning and fundraising and pretty much any form you can think of. And that has, email to target functionality such as MPs, etc., and also some really nice fundraising tools. So we work with a range of different charities from across Europe. So from biggies all the way through to, I think our smallest client is 1.5 people. So we're used to a whole different range of sizes. So as such, the projects that we do scale depending on what the organization needs. So from a few days consultancy here and there to full on hands-on projects delivery. So what we're going to be covering today, first off, looking at what is a proposition. So it's one of those words that means different things to different people. So we're just going to take a sec to explain what we'll be covering today. So it's not, you don't get 20 minutes in and get very disappointed that it's not what you're aiming for. Then we're going to explore the process as 3 stages. First is your strategic foundations. You'll then be looking at creating the propositions. And finally, you of course need to test to see what's working. So you don't just create something, put it out in the world and hope for the best. We have a free resource today if you are interested. This is just a simple strategy template. If you're looking to do this kind of work, you're looking to put together a proposition, you can download this template for free, of course, and there are some key questions in there which help you write down your objectives, think through your metrics, etc. It's not huge, it's deliberately, it's a framework for you. But if you'd like to, please do pause this recording now, hop over to that URL, grab yourself the document, and there'll be various moments throughout where we'll pause and you can fill in some of that if you wanted to. But of course, entirely up to you. So, what is a proposition? So different organizations have different definitions of what a proposition is. So some of them would define it in a way that other organizations will go, oh no, actually that's a strap line. Oh, but actually it's a proposition. Oh, but actually it's a campaign message. And I don't want to do a deep dive into the semantics here. What we're fundamentally going to be discussing today, whether you call it a proposition or you call it a strap line or you call it a campaign slogan, we're going to be looking at how to develop a succinct phrase which allows you to quickly and clearly communicate your offer, your goal, your organization, whatever you're trying to communicate. It is also going to need to be unifying. So if you're communicating campaign, it needs to cover the campaign, not just one aspect of it. If you're trying to communicate your organization, then of course it needs to cover the whole organization. So it needs to be unifying something. And it may also include a call to action. Typically it would. But it depends. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. It depends on how you're defining this and what you need for your project fundamentally. So the way I'm going to be exploring proposition today is I'm going to be looking at it in the kind of framework of a proposition. Proposition is a headline phrase, strapline, communication tool, under which there can be specific messaging for it. So it doesn't always have you don't always just say that one sentence. You may deliver it with other supporting text, with other supporting content, etc., which means you have different messaging underneath that proposition. But it really depends on how you'd like to do this. So that's what I'm going to be communicating about today. So how to develop a succinct communication top line sentence, I guess, that helps you to support your campaign, your project, your organization, etc. So a few examples of things that I would define as a proposition in this context would be versus arthritis. It's not all right, it's arthritis. And a few different iterations of this you can see here. It's not a bad mood, it's arthritis, for example. Another nice one is Battersea. Rescue is my favorite breed. Again, you can argue it's a strapline. But ultimately, it's a communication framework that's helping to unify their work and communicate it really clearly to their supporters. And a nice one from Oxfam, which is fight inequality, beat poverty. So that's not just one specific campaign, that's the goal of that whole chunk of their campaign's work. So again, what we're going to be looking at is how to create the strategy for this, how to then get creative with your copy, do some testing, and then ultimately, once you've tested and seen what's worked, you move on to the rollout stage. So without further ado, if you could move to your strategy template, if you've decided to download one, and answer the first question. So what are you actually trying to create? What does a proposition mean to you? So just take a moment with that. Please do pause if you'd like to do this. I'm going to continue for the people who aren't using that document, so you don't have to sit around while I stand in silence for 3 minutes. Okay, moving on. So stage one is your strategic foundations. Now, of course, with any project you're doing, you have to make sure you've got a good strategy in place, because if you don't know if you're working in the right direction. You don't know if you're achieving what you're trying to achieve, and you can really lose track. This is especially true when working in big teams, when you all might have slightly different ideas in your head of what you're trying to get done. So it's really important that you not only work this through, but you write it down. So we're just going to touch upon a few basics of writing a good strategy. We're not going to deep dive here. Each of these sections could easily have its own whole day training session. So we're just going to do them in a very, very top line way, but it's very important you have considered them. So your objective, of course, is what are you hoping to achieve? And your metrics are how will you evidence if you've been successful? So how do you know that you've achieved your objective? So we're going to be using a case study today to bring some of these ideas to light, because I know it can feel a little bit dry when we're just talking about theory. So I'm going to use a case study for a project that I'm currently working on with an organisation called Sustrans. So those of you who don't know who Sustrans are, it stands for Sustainable Transport. They work to support sustainable transport throughout the UK. So that's cycling, walking, any other kind of people-powered movement, both in towns and cities, but also across the country through the National Cycle Network. So I'm going to be using a few examples of them to bring this to life. So if we start with the objectives, their objectives for their proposition project were that they wanted to recruit new supporters to the charity who would become donors, but who would also support them non-financially. Their secondary objective is existing supporters. Now, you know, this is 1, 2, AB, this is hierarchical. That is very much intentional. It's very important that your objectives are in a hierarchy. Otherwise, you won't be able to make difficult decisions when the time comes. So you need to know when the time comes, if you have to make a decision that, for example, is going to really help the project for your existing supporters, but actually is going to hinder it for your new supporters, you need to be able to look at the objectives and go, no, we're not doing that. You need to be able to make those tough decisions. And having this in the first instance is really great to get the team on the same page as well, especially if you're working across different departments. So time to go back to the strategy template. What are you trying to achieve? What's your objective? Take a moment to write that down in your document. Pause if you need to. And we're going to move on for those of you who have paused and come back. So how you know if you've been successful? So these are the Sustrans metrics that were chosen. So the main one for them is that they wanted to achieve a good cost per supporter for people within the key audiences. So this is really important. It's not just anyone, it's their key audiences. And this is the cost per lead. I'll sometimes say CPL. This is cost per lead, cost per new supporter. We also then have a few engagement metrics. So obviously the things that we really want to know is, are these supporters going to give us money in the long term? And if they're going to, take non-financial actions in the long term. But we're not going to know that for a while. So we need to create these interim metrics. So the interim metric we're using is engagement with the first handful of emails. So are they opening them? Are they taking action? And that will help to guide us, because the recruitment will happen before we have that long-term data. Again, hop to your strategy template if you're using it and think about how you're going to evidence success. Pause if you need to. Next up, you need to think about your organisation. So do an audit of what you've done before. How did it go? Who did it work well for? Who didn't it work well for? There's no reason that you need to be doing the same learnings every time. You should be building upon what's happened before. And then you can ask some key questions. So the key questions that I would suggest, but of course you can always go with different ones depending on your needs for your project. How much of your work does the proposition need support? Is it just one aspect, or is it everything? Because that changes quite a lot. When it's a lot of different things, you need to explore what those things have in common. Now, you're one organization, so you should have things in common. The organization should have some kind of unifying force, so you should always be able to find what that is. And then you can think about what makes it special. So if the proposition is for a campaign, what makes a campaign special? If it's for an appeal, what makes the appeal special, etc. If it's for your organization as a whole, you need to think about that as your organization as a whole. How do we stand out from other organizations doing something similar? Again, strategy template, hit pause, go back and see if you can answer this question as well, which is what makes your organization, project, campaign, the thing you're developing a proposition for special? And we're going to continue. Your audience is your next thing to look at. So you've already looked at yourself. You now need to look at the people you're communicating with. So the target audience for this is not always the same as your current lists. That's something really important to note, and we'll discuss that more in a second. And what you already know about them. So a lot of organizations have personas or insight or audience research. If you have that, do make sure you're drawing upon it. That's absolute gold for this kind of stuff, because it means you're not having to work that out. You can build upon it. So to use an example from Sustrans, we have the primary audience they have on their supporter list, especially as donors, is this audience persona called Stephen. So Stephen is an influential retiree, basically. It's obviously non-gendered, but the name is Stephen. And so this is their main audience. Now, the reason for this is because most of their supporters have been recruited physically on the National Cycle Network. So they have this bias, but now they're switching to more online communications. They're saying, okay, actually, we don't need to just get Stevens anymore. We can go more broadly. And so they looked at together we looked at their 7 personas, and we chose 3 that were most suitable for this project. So Stephen, Helen, who's the health conscious parent, and Jessica, the mindful green, as we describe them. If you are not sure how to choose your audience, you need to go back to revisit your objectives and think about which audience is most likely to help achieve those for you. So if your objective is to get more donors, you need to think about which of your personas or which of your target audiences are more likely to give you money. If your objective is to get more campaigners, you need to think about those who will be more campaigning, for example. With this project, we wanted a balance of both, and so we've got a bit of a mix across these personas. Again, revisit your strategy template, I think, for the last time, and think about your target audience for this and how do they differ from your existing. And with a sense check on this, you need to make sure that this description is clear enough that you could, if it's for existing supporters, hand it to your data team and they'll get you the exact right people. And if it's for new supporters, that you can put it into Facebook and get the exact right people. So do be really specific about who your target audience is here. It will really serve you well later. Stage 2, creating propositions. So once you've got your strategy in place, it's time to do a bit of an audit of past activity and content and then start developing your proposition. So unsurprisingly, good proposition starts with the audience. So you'll need to develop some key questions for this. The key questions are going to be pretty unique depending on your organization, your goals, your project, etc. So just to give you some examples of some of the questions we asked on the Sustrans project. Why might a person who isn't yet aware of us choose to support Sustrans? So we're aware that Sustrans doesn't have huge brand awareness, so that was one of the challenges that we wanted to address. What matters most to this person in life? So because this project was about getting people to be active themselves, we needed to think about their day-to-day and their priorities. So this was why one of these questions is important for us. If you're running a campaign project to get people to do something that doesn't directly change their life, this question would be different. Other question is what's changed in the last 6 months? Obviously, this year's been a bit special, shall we say? And so we needed to reflect upon this. These personas were created before a pandemic. Therefore, what has changed for these audiences? How has their day-to-day shifted? How have their needs shifted? And then we thought about what words and phrases might appeal to them and what might put them off. So you need to be asking these key questions for each of your target audiences, not just one of them. And then you can explore the points of commonality and difference. So if you're a visual thinker like I am, I really like to diagram things. You might find that like a Venn diagram could be helpful for you. So for example, if you had person A and person B, you can look at the points of commonality by using some kind of visual design like this. Or if you have 3, of course, it may look like that. So your proposition has to succeed at the points of overlap between the audiences. but it may also succeed at the points where there isn't overlap or there's partial overlap. But do you notice here how when there's more audiences, there's fewer areas of commonality? That's really important. It's really critical that you don't have too many target audiences, because if you try to be everything to everyone, you're going to fail on all counts. It's going to be really generic. It's going to be really boring. So prioritizing your audiences in the same way we chose 3 personas out of the possible 7 for the Sustrans project, it's going to really help you there to find something really striking and unique and powerful in that point of intersection. So then you start writing, basically. I mean, there's no shortcut around this. I like to write a lot more propositions than we're going to need and then whittle it down. So it's better to start with more and then be able to make it a bit sharper. But you basically want to be looking back on everything you've done so far. So your audience insight, your areas of commonality you've established, the idea of what makes this project special, lists of keywords, you've got all of this stuff that you've worked on now. So you can start the writing with that in your back pocket. We developed 5 propositions, of which 2 were chosen for testing. So the criteria upon which you choose them, it should obviously be based in your objectives and your audience insight as to choose which of them you'd like to test with. So we chose 2, we being Sustrans and us. Sustrans got the final word, of course, as it should be. And so the question is, based upon audience insight, would proposition X help specific audience to achieve objectives? That's an example of like a success question you could ask when selecting propositions. So we selected 2 of the more versatile propositions. So they were sustainable transport powered by you and cycling, walking to happier, greener futures. Simple, versatile. So if we use this first example, sustainable transport powered by you, that's the general one that sits in the middle of the Venn diagram. But there's also a few iterations that can sit on the outside. So safer cities powered by you. So this is for the Helens who commute to work by bike, for example. Bigger adventures powered by you for the Stevens of the world. So you can see how that would sit together and how that proposition would be versatile enough. And again, cycling, walking to happy, greener futures, we use different messaging to deliver it and make it feel different for different audiences. You need to develop visuals. So they need to support your message, but they shouldn't interfere with the test, which means that if you're testing 2 messages, they should ideally have the same visuals. Otherwise, you could accidentally be testing the visuals instead of the message. So you want to choose visuals that will work with both propositions. So here, for example, the visual is identical, but the proposition has changed. And again, another example. So which of these do you think will win? Have a think, hold on to it, see if you were right when we move on to the testing stage. So we then move to real world testing to see if this would actually work. If you want to know what you're going to test, you need to go back to your objectives. And then you can prioritize what's most important. What do I need to learn first? And do make sure that you are doing it sequentially like that. Where to test? If your goal is to develop a proposition for your existing list, you're going to be testing on whatever channel is your primary communication channel for that audience. Typically, that means email. If your objective is to get new supporters on board, you need to think about where you're intending to do your acquisition. So where your target audience is. In our instance, we chose to use Facebook because it's where our audience are. And it was by testing on Facebook, we knew the results we got were broadly applicable to people on Facebook. So that's really important to know as well. You can't necessarily transpose it to different platforms. With Facebook, of course, it's really important to get the objective right. So are you looking to learn or minimize a cost per lead? Facebook is always trying to push you to do a cost per lead optimization. But if you're trying to test a proposition, you need to make sure that each of your ad sets gets enough spend on it that you can actually conclude something useful. Because if you let Facebook optimize, it might put all of your budget on one of the ads and you won't actually know how the other one performed. So that's really important when setting up your ads to have that in mind. You can also run some tests concurrently and some you can't. So you do need to prioritize what you want to be doing. I like a stage approach to Facebook ads. So you prioritize the learnings and you do them stage by stage. So our first goal, of course, is that we wanted to know how each of the audiences responded to each proposition. So that was our pure goal. We weren't trying to also optimize for cost. We weren't also doing 500 different variants. And the metrics, of course, we were looking at cost per acquisition and engagement after recruitment, because the donation metric was too far down the line to have. This is more indicative. So what we did is we created these different ads. So each audience received the general version, which is the blue outline. And they also received at least one more specific messaging. So for example, the Jessicas got some messaging around the environment. The Helens got some messaging around families. So we tested both general and more specific for those audiences. And we made sure that each of these ads got an equal spend, not equal enough spend of ads in Facebook, so that we had enough data that we could analyze it and say, yes, this is statistically significant. This is a learning worth having. So ultimately, we ran those ads for a couple of weeks. We got statistical significance for all of the ads, for all but one audience. So for stage 2, we're testing again with that audience to try and get a higher volume to give us a statistical significance, with the hope that for stage 3, we can roll this out and optimize. At which point we can switch to a cost per lead optimization model. So we can try and drive that cost down more. So there's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but in general, that's your process. I know it's a bit of a strange format because I'm pre-recording a video. There's no conversation or questions, but if you do want to reach out, I'd love to hear from you. Even if you just got a question or you've got a project you want to talk about, please do reach out. You can see our web address there, my email address. There's also loads of free materials on our website if you're interested, but otherwise, thank you very much for your attention.